Good morning. Welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist video series. I'm Kyla Watson here with Phil Long, and we are matching today.
It's okay to be Twinkies occasionally.
Yeah, I was saying this was not planned, but
Not planned.
great minds think alike, I guess.
Yep.
Well, today we're going to be talking about cover crops, and really how to manage those if they're before corn or before beans.
Yeah, another great green topic, if you will. Cover crops. We had a lot of cover crops go out last fall. Some was for the derecho hit areas, but a lot of cover crops went out, regardless of the reason. There was just a great opportunity last fall with conditions. A lot of tillage was done, but a lot of cover crops were also planted because of the extra time. We had time to get out and get manure spread and then put a cover crop on. Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of cover crops that did go out last year, which is good to see.
Yeah, and it really was the ideal season for that.
Yeah, it was all around, and I just recently was seeing some data come back from last year, actually, and this is a trend that's easily seen when we have drought years, but the yield gains that we saw last year in some cases were upwards of 20 bushel on cover crops.
Wow.
So just a little plug there, a reminder, especially in dry conditions. I know this has always been a hot topic, even out in the irrigated areas, they take up too much moisture, that kind of thing. Well, that detriment that people call it, is really offset by the soil health aspect, better porosity, better water infiltration. We're thinking about spring, we want soil to be warm, but in the middle of the season, your crops want to stay cool, and they want that soil cool, and they want moisture in the soil profile, and those are all those things that cover crops really help us out with that you don't see.
And we were just talking about this morning. I thought you used a cool visual that the roots of those cover crops is literally the glue that holds it together.
Yeah, exactly. Each cover crop has their own different kind of glue too, or however you want to think about it. But that's what really ties it all together. That's part of the the breakdown and the fungi that are in the soil that really help us out, that tie that whole web together, that help the corn roots take up phosphorus and lots of nutrients and water. So it's just a big cycle that maybe isn't as well understood, but it's unique and there is huge benefits to it.
Right. Okay. So, well, let's first talk about cover crops before soybeans.
Sure. Yeah. So, want to start with the easy one before soybeans. This is ideal. From what I say, as far as first time cover cropping, I think of cover crops, especially cereal rye. We're kind of focusing on cereal rye because it's a primary one, and that's the one that overwinters. So that's the one we have to deal with in the spring. So talking about that, terminate at planting. You could even do it, right at planting or shortly after, something depending on your insurance. You definitely want to check those things out. But it's honestly easier to plant green with soybeans as long as you have a planter that can get down in there. It's heavy enough, no-till, heavy enough to get down in there and get the right seeding depth and everything. Typically, it's easier to plant green. If you terminate early, like you should with corn, you can have actually more issues, not only with issues with row cleaners and so forth, picking things up and getting twirled around and making a mess. It's just much simpler with that fresh green, lush, green stem and so forth. Actually, just to pull up the row cleaners and plant right into it if you have if your openers are in good shape. I will throw that caveat in there, but yeah, with soybeans, and in my opinion, it does best to just plant into them. Okay. In our area in north, you're not going to have 3, 4, 5 feet tall rye, so plant right into them, and then it'll help give you that cover as you terminate it with the herbicide and kill that rye off. It will help you with that weed control. So it really does. It has that nice kind of allelopathic effect, on a lot of weed species, and will keep those weeds down until you need to put a residual herbicide out there in season. So some great benefits there, but just remember, it typically in soybeans is almost easier to plant into that green material when it's softer and not straw-like.
Okay, very good. So how does that affect our depth control when we are planting?
Yeah, still a lot of considerations you have to take into effect. I'm trying to make it sound easy, but depth control is one big thing, and I would couple with that closing the furrow. A lot of times, I talked about weight. You have to have enough weight, either a no-till planter or even some weight on the planter to get that planter pushing down. And then a lot of times you have to go out there and double, triple check and check each row too, what the depth is. Sometimes you'll have to go much deeper than what you typically are for normal planting conditions. So just pay attention to that. You know, if you're setting it down at the 3.5 inch mark, you know, don't be sweating bullets. You know, for that field that's where it's got to be, and then the next field you're gonna have to check. But the other thing is those you know, the down pressure on your closing wheels is really important, and this is where a spiked or poly or there's lots of different options we've talked about is really helpful for closing that furrow, because and the offset ones do a good job too. But just additional ways to get that seed to soil contact is really important. And I've seen in some cases, you know, where it is a challenge to get enough down pressure to close that furrow. Soybeans can germinate, they pull water really well, but you still want them to be covered in soil, because there's going to be predation by insects and things that'll get at them too in that kind of situation. So you need to have that furrow closed, and you need to have them, you know, at least 1 inch deep. So pay attention to that when you're going out. If you're planting green, it's a great option, but you gotta tweak those things. You can't just go out there and plant like normal.
Okay. So, is there anything else that you would like to add on the soybean side before we jump over to the corn?
Yeah, I mentioned it before, but I just say on the row cleaners, depending how you're doing it, and some people, a lot of people nowadays have land rollers, and may roll before or after. There's not a set good way or worse way, I guess I'd say. I like to plant into it standing up. It's easier to do it that way. If you roll it flat and then try to plant into it, I would get the row cleaners out of the way, because it's going to make more of a mess. It's going to tangle and twist. You know, just plant into it with good, sharp, well-adjusted openers. You can roll after you plant too. Sometimes that provides a challenge for the soybeans coming up, but in my opinion, gauge that on how much rye is out there. If it's not a huge lush stand of rye, you didn't put 100 pounds of rye out last fall, you'll probably be fine.
Okay, very good. So now let's jump over to the corn side, and you did start a little bit. You do want to terminate this before planting. Yeah,
this is a big must with corn. That's why it's the challenging one, because it's a grass crop. So grass crop going into grass crop is the challenge. So terminate it early. We usually say at least 2 weeks beforehand to get that release. You know, the release, hopefully you catch it when it's still vegetative, but that's the challenge. Getting out there when there's enough warm temperatures that the herbicide will work inside the plant. You know, it's easier when it's vegetative. Once it starts throwing a stem, it's more focused on reproduction. The herbicide doesn't quite go where you want it to, and may not get complete kill sometimes. So there's some challenges there, but get it killed, I would just say, as early as you can. You know, we always talk about when the grass starts greening up, there's enough warm nighttime temperatures and daytime temperatures that cereal rye is you know, active and can move that herbicide and get a good kill on it. So biggest thing with this is nitrogen. I talk about this a lot, but it has to do with whether it's reproductive or vegetative. That's the seed-in ratio. It's like a switch in the plant. When it goes into reproduction, it starts really putting that stalk on there, which is straw, and that seed-in ratio goes much higher. So you're gonna have a lot more carbon out there that's gonna steal the nitrogen from your corn once it starts breaking down. So if you get it when it's vegetative, you know, it just looks like little, you know, grass leaves out there. It hasn't, just tillers essentially, it hasn't started growing upright. It'll break down much faster, melt into the soil and break down a lot quicker. And those microbes won't steal your nitrogen to break down that high carbon residue, because it won't be high carbon. So just some things to keep in mind there. You know, when it comes to nitrogen on corn, if you've got ability to do starter, 2x2x2 or 2x2 or something like that is an awesome option here. Put some extra nitrogen down. You know, in my opinion, in 20 to 30, even up to 50 pounds is not a bad idea if you can. Like I said, obviously this has to be off to the side of the seed. But, you know, putting extra nitrogen in there, especially if you have a good stand of cereal rye. So it's that trade-off, that carbon to nitrogen ratio. But if you give it the nitrogen there that it can utilize, you're not going to see that you know, that harsh reaction or yield reduction from that early season stunning of growth. Okay,
so would you like to talk then about insect pressure?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and honestly, it can be either or. You know, soybeans or corn. Cereal rye is one that tends to attract some of our insects. You know, slugs, army worms, and so forth that may target those fields early season. They see that green color, and to them, that's a heyday. You know, they want to target that one. So if you have that early season, it's growing. Obviously, it's going to be green, the first green field out in the county probably. You gotta just do your extra due diligence to scout that. So terminating it early is good for corn, but you got to remember there's a trade-off there. That crop, if there are insects out there already, that crop dies. They need somewhere to feed, and that corn crop is just coming up as that they're done feeding on the dead. They're tired of the plants that are dying, so they're going to move over right to that corn, and that corn is going to be extremely vulnerable at a small stage. So when soybeans, when you plant into them, by the time that plant dies, if you're killing it at planting, there's enough of a gap there. The soybeans are already starting to get bigger by the time the plants lose enough green color. So there's a trade-off there. You want to kill it early for corn, or else you're going to see some yield drag there with the carbon and nitrogen thing. But you're going to have to take the extra time to scout early, right off the bat, right when they're coming out of the ground, to make sure you're not having issues with armyworm, slugs, cutworms, things like that. Okay.
And then our final point on this side, would you just like to talk about planter setup?
Yeah, so this is, nothing above and beyond what I talked about on soybeans, but obviously corn is a little more picky, especially in terms of seeding depth. We've talked about this here recently. It's really important to get that seeding depth on corn. So, that back part of the planter is really important. You need to get that furrow started with good, sharp openers, but then you need to make sure that seed depth is where you want it at, good 1.5 to 2 inches at least. But remember, you're probably going to have to adjust things depending on the soil conditions, dry, obviously what you're facing out there. You're going to have to adjust it so you get the right seed depth, independent of your other fields that you've been planting. So that's the biggest thing, seed to soil contact, adjusting those things. But most of that can be mitigated by taking the time, slowing down, and getting it right.
Right.
We're usually where it happens is people get frustrated and they just go, and then we have issues.
Yep. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast.
Exactly. Good motto in this case.
Yes, exactly. Well, is there anything else you would like to add this morning?
Yeah, one of the things, and this is kind of just me personally, but not to sound harsh, but in my opinion, with cover crops, you kind of always have to have a plan B.
Okay.
I've had issues. Usually herbicides, especially glyphosate, works really well, terminating cereal rye. Tillage can be a struggle sometimes. Weather, warm temperatures and so forth, all these things interact, but have a plan B so that you're not really frustrated. If you don't have a plan B, you're going to be frustrated and never do it again.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Have a good day.